for just like, okay, a car wreck or a fire, and it's like, no, all kinds of crazy, calls throughout the night that they're taking for diabetic people that are having problems, or people fighting, or people that should be somewhere else that, just all kinds, not just accidents, not just fires. It's all kinds of things.
Any excuse to get that big truck.
I guess so.
Chicken leg day. Where's the big truck?
I saw somebody else pull up.
Yeah, I saw a white truck.
Zane?
Oh, yeah.
Zane, yeah.
Want to add a chair, Jordan? All right. Well, did anyone actually make it through all of the letter? Wow.
But I
Joe
couldn't
Bet.
really probably couldn't regurgitate it.
Yeah,
Teacher's
yes,
pet.
but I don't know. I went somewhere else during parts
Yeah,
and back
zoned
up,
out.
rewind. Yeah, it was.
It's okay. We are going to skip some of the sections as we go through it because we just don't have enough time, probably, and some of it is not. Some of it is more important than the rest. I know. I know it was a lot of reading and a lot more reading than we've done in the past. So everyone who didn't finish it, you're forgiven. I will say that this is one that I would save and that I would go back to. I think this is something you could read like every year and get something out of it.
Right.
But we'll work through it. For those of you who read at least some of it, or all of it, or most of it, what are some of your takeaways from it?
I was kind of struck by you got a really good feeling, or at least maybe I felt like you got a good feeling about the environment that they were living in at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
The fact that he talks about, it doesn't feel like you have ground under your feet, which
Sure.
is like, makes you stop thinking, I've never really heard that phrase before, don't feel the ground under your feet. But it makes sense if they were going through such a, upheaval over those years of, Nazi domination, that it was,
So this is going to be quite a change in Bonhoeffer. So this is December, Christmas, New Year, 1942. Going into 1943. Next week, there's just 2 letters. They're much shorter. The whole thing is so. For just so you know, next time, each letter is 1 letter is 2 pages, and 1 letter is like a page and a half. So a lot less reading. But they're in 1944. And if you read a lot of Bonhoeffer, you'll see a change in his writing and his style. For one thing, when we read it, we'll keep in mind that we're talking about a guy who, not long before this, is a pacifist. And what he's struggling with, one of the big things that he's struggling with, is how to deal with Nazism, Hitler, where he's at, while trying to maintain being a Christian, following Jesus. Yeah. It's a really difficult thing. There's probably not a whole lot of pacifists put in much harder positions than Bonhoeffer was in Nazi Germany. So we'll see how he struggles with it. What conclusion does he reach about? I mean, he's being veiled in this letter. Obviously, he can't be like, "Hey, let's off Hitler." That's not going to go over very well with the censors.
How would that go well?
But he's clearly hinting that, hey, well, it's time to take action. We got to get rid of this guy, and he justifies it. He probably wouldn't like that term, but how does he justify offing Hitler, basically, or encouraging other people to stand up, to do their civic duty, and get rid of Hitler? What is his justification for that?
It's a moral thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, and he would actually probably say it's not the moral thing to do, but it's the responsible thing to do. And he's going to make that a big kind of claim. Is you'll see this where he's talking about these morals and stuff are really nice to have abstractly, But the real world, you can't just keep yourself clean. You have to make decisions, and sometimes you're deciding between the best of two evils.
Pick a side.
Yeah, and so what Bonhoeffer comes down to, what he really does is he still thinks it's a sin. He's basically just going to go, but God's going to have to forgive me. So we'll get into that because it's an interesting thing. But we have to remember, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a man who is all about love, who loves his country, who loves his people, who's at heart a pacifist. I mean, he was going to go to India and study under Gandhi. And he's called into action. So this is 10 years after Nazism. And we're not going to read every little account, those whole sections we're going to skip. There's some things I want to highlight. If as I'm going through, there are other things that I've skipped that you want to highlight, then we can definitely go through that as well. So please stop me if I do. He starts by saying, hey, 10 years is a long time, but we haven't lost it. He says, time is lost when we have not lived. We have not experienced things, learned, worked, suffered, and enjoyed and suffered as human beings. Lost time is unfulfilled, empty time. So these 10 years where they've been struggling under Nazism, he doesn't consider that decade lost time because they've lived, they've experienced, they've learned, they've worked. It's been filled. It's not unfilled. He says we've lost many things far beyond measure, but time was not lost. And then he says this: the insights and experiences we have gained, and of which we have subsequently become aware, are only abstractions from reality, from life itself. What does that mean? The insights and experiences we have gained, and of which we have subsequently become aware. So they had these insights and experience. They gained these insights and experiences, and then after they experienced them, subsequently they became aware of them. But he says they are only abstractions from reality, from life itself. What does that mean? What's an abstraction? So abstract. There's abstract versus what? Concrete.
Yeah.
Concrete. Abstract. What's abstraction?
Kind of like the ideal version of like what these things have in common, maybe, but not really.
Yeah, it's an idea of them. It could be maybe a simplified version of them or a conceptual version of it, but it's not the real thing. So he said these insights that we become aware of, they're only abstractions. They're conceptual versions. They're simplified versions. They're ideas of them, but they're not. Are abstractions from reality, from life itself. Right? We've gotten these. We have gained these insights and experience from living life. And then he says, just as the ability to forget is a gift of grace, so similarly is memory, the repetition of received teachings, part of a responsible life. Responsibility is going to be huge for Bonhoeffer here. And so he says, in the following pages, I'm going to give an accounting of the shared experience. And he says, this is going to be a shared experience, not personal experiences. He warns us that it's not systematically organized, it's not arguments and theories, but conclusions about human experience. Okay, so he's at the very stage he's going. When we read his ethics are very theoretical. I mean, all writing on ethics. Well, there's practical ethics, but if I said, Jordan and I, let's go get coffee and talk about ethics, it's going to delve into the realm of theory pretty quickly. And Bonhoeffer is, from the very beginning, saying we're not going to talk about concepts and abstractions and theories. We're talking about actual experience. And he's saying not just my experience. These experiences that we've had in these last 10 years have been shared by all of us. He says connected only by concrete experience as opposed to abstractions that have reached together in a circle of like-minded people. None of this is new. Rather, it's something we have long been familiar with. So then we'll skip down to where he goes, without ground under one's feet. So he goes, he theorizes, of course, he's in the middle of it. He's asking the question if there's ever been people who have so little ground under their feet. So what does he mean by that? What does he mean that him and this circle of people have so little ground underneath their feet?
Is it talking about reality? Like you need to be grounded?
Yeah, so I think when he's talking about grounded is grounded in reality, but also probably grounded in like certainty, right? So they're yes, they have no grounding like in reality because it's been all like thrown into disrepair and confusion, but also they're fairly uncertain. There's nothing, everything that they're dealing with, there's no playbook for this. Like no one knows what to do with this. And he's asking the question, was anybody else ever been like this? And were they looking entirely in what has passed away and in what is yet to come? So were they spending their time like looking at the past and the future? And then he says, kind of middle of the paragraph, and nevertheless, without being dreamers, did they await with calm and confidence the successful outcome of their endeavor? So Bonhoeffer is going again in here. Being a dreamer in this scenario is bad. It's like how did they handle being in this situation without ground under their feet? What did they do? Then it goes to the who stands firm. He says there's this huge masquerade of evil has thrown all ethical concepts into confusion. This is a guy who wrote a book on ethics.
Yeah.
Is saying this huge masquerade of evil has thrown all ethical concepts into confusion. Evil should appear in the form of light, good deeds, historical necessity, social justice. Is absolutely bewildering for one coming from the world of ethical concepts that we have received. So he's got ethical concepts that are now coming into contact with this evil, and the ethical concepts, like, they bounce off of it. It doesn't do anything. It hits this masquerading evil, and it's just bewildering. So then he says there's these reasonable ones, and he puts them in quotations, and he's going to contrast the reasonable ones versus the responsible ones. The reasonable ones have failed. And what does he say of the reasonable ones? What's the very first qualification? What makes them reasonable? Why are they called reasonable ones? They're those who what?
Like realism?
Well, what's he say? No, really. Or what does it say? Those who what? The failure of the reasonable ones. Those who... Do I have a different translation?
You do have a different translation.
With the best intentions.
Give me yours.
Their naive lack of realism.
That's fine. I'll do this one.
They think that
The reasonable people... Oh, yeah. I forgot. I gave you like an easier translation.
It's okay.
The reasonable people's failure is obvious. With the best intentions and naive lack of
There's
realism...
one harder than this?
Yeah.
Right.
They are thinking. They have a lack of realism. They have a naive lack of realism. They're not standing in reality. And then he says, okay, so you've got people who they're disappointed by the world's unreasonableness. So they're ineffective. They step aside in resignation. They're going to try to be they're going to try to be reasonable, but their reasonableness is naivety. It is a lack of realism. And then when the world is unreasonable, they have nothing else to do. All they're trying to do is reason with people. When that fails, they've got nothing left. All they do is step aside. And this is more pathetic is the collapse of moral fanaticism or ethical fanaticism. The fanatic thinks that his single-minded principles qualify him to do battle with the powers of evil. But he winds up getting entangled in non-essentials and falls into the trap set by cleverer people. So this moral fanaticism or ethical fanaticism is a category that Bonhoeffer would have put himself in at this point when he was a pacifist. They think, again, we got thinking, that single-minded principles qualify him to deal with the powers of evil. I have my ideals. So my ideals versus evil. But what happens is, the metaphor he gives is that it's the bull going against the red cloak instead of the person who's holding it. It's not real. This moral fanaticism is, again, not real. They get entangled in non-essentials. All right, so you don't want to be this reasonable person because as soon as the world is unreasonable, they don't have any other tools. There's nothing else they can do. You don't want to be a moral fanatic or an ethical fanatic because your principles, again, they don't do anything. Bonhoeffer is saying these aren't effective against the evil that they're dealing with. Then you have a man who has a conscience. He fights single-handedly against heavy odds in situations that call for a decision. So now he's dealing with, okay, you have to make a decision. And he's fighting single-handedly against it. But when he has to choose, and all he has is his conscience, it's eventually going to tear him to pieces. It says that his evil approaches him in so many different ways that his conscience can't handle it. It becomes nervous and vacillating. Till at last he contents himself with a salved instead of a clear conscience. He's going to find a way to try and make himself feel better rather than have a clear conscience. So he lies to his own conscience in order to avoid despair. Okay, there's got to be a right decision. He has a conscience. He wants to do the right thing. But this kind of evil that Bonhoeffer's talking about, it's so bewildering, so seductive that the man with a conscience can't fight against it. And the issue is the man with the conscience is by himself. It's a man versus his own conscience. And a man with his own conscience cannot single-handedly fight against this kind of evil. And then he says this: for a man whose only support is his conscience can never realize that a bad conscience may be stronger and more wholesome than a deluded one. Bonhoeffer is saying it's better to do something that goes against your conscience than to delude yourself into thinking that you're doing the right thing. It's better to do the wrong thing for the right reason than to delude yourself into thinking you're doing the right thing for the right reason. Okay? It's better to have a clear conscience than a whole conscience. You can already see the little hints that of the argument that he's formulating, how he's had to convince himself. And then he says, okay, how about duty? All right, so we don't, reasonable people, they have a naive lack of realism. As soon as they kind of come against the world, when the world's unreasonable, they have no other tools. They have to step aside in resignation, or they're just going to collapse before the stronger party. The moral or ethical fanatic, they're going to get entangled in non-essentials. They, again, don't have anything to battle with the powers of evil. Their high-minded principles aren't effective in the real world. The man with a conscience, just him and his conscience, is eventually going to be overcome and bewildered and just find a way to make his conscience feel better and delude himself. And then we have someone who has duty. He says, okay, for all these decisions, the way of duty is the sure way out, right? Here, what is commanded is accepted as what is most certain. And the responsibility for it rests on the commander, not on the person who commanded it. This is the whole, I was ordered to do it, right? And this explanation is a lot of German soldiers who did awful things. This is what they gave. This is the answer. I was just following orders. I was just following orders. But no one who confines himself to the limits of duty, doing whatever you're commanded to without thinking, ever goes so far as to venture on his sole responsibility to act in the only way that makes it possible to score a direct hit on evil and defeat it. So if you confine yourself to the limits of duty, then you'll never be able to actually hit evil. Because the man of duty will, in the end, have to do his duty by the devil too. Eventually, what happens, it's all well and good to go, I don't want to make this decision, I'm just going to follow orders. But what if the person who's making you follow orders is the devil? Or the Fuhrer?
Right.
Then you're doing your duty to the devil, too. So duty's not going to save you. Conscience won't save you. Moral fanaticism won't save you. Being reasonable won't save you. None of these things will work against the kind of evil that Bonhoeffer's dealing with. Then he says, the man who asserts his complete freedom to stand foursquare against or to the world, who values, here we go, the necessary deed, the necessary action. He values, which usually in values we think of virtues, who values the necessary deed. Sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger said that. Values the necessary deed more highly than an unspoiled conscience or reputation. Not that having a conscience that's not unspoiled, that's not spoiled, or a reputation is not spoiled. Not that that's not important, but the necessary deed is more important. Who is ready to sacrifice a barren principle, a principle that can't do anything, that's not producing anything, for a fruitful compromise. Compromise your principles. Kill Hitler. Or the barren wisdom of a middle course for a fruitful radicalism. Let him beware lest his freedom should bring him down. And he's saying we got to be careful because you're saying I want to be free. I'm going to value necessary deed more than all that. But you still have to be careful because his will to assent to do what is bad to ward off something else, something worse. He's talking about choosing the best of two evils. In doing so, he will no longer be able to realize that the worse, which he wants to avoid, might be the better. Here we have the raw material of tragedy. Tragedy in Greek tragedy is a righteous man faced with a moral dilemma. And that a good man faced with a moral dilemma. He has two bad choices, and that's how Bonhoeffer's, that's where he's placing himself and the people with him. We are good people. I mean, he's like to say good people, everybody's a sinner, but we are people who are trying to be good, who are faced with two evil decisions. And we have to be careful when we do it. Here and there, people flee from public altercation into the sanctuary of private virtuousness. So he's criticizing these people who flee from like the arena, the public altercation, into the sanctuary of private virtuousness. But anyone who does this must shut his mouth and his eyes to injustice around him. Bonhoeffer is saying you can't flee from the public altercation when there's all this injustice around you. Only at the cost of self-deception can he keep himself pure from the contamination arising from responsible action. Responsible action will contaminate you. You will no longer be pure, morally pure. Your ethical standards, these things won't be pure. In spite of all that he does, what he leaves undone will rob him of his peace of mind. He will either go to pieces because of this disquiet or become the most hypocritical of Pharisees. So who stands fast? Who is going to, this is the question at the beginning of this section. Who stands fast? This is how people used to write letters to each other. Only the man whose final standard, not only standard, not the only thing that matters, final standard, is not his reason, his principles, his reason, that's the reasonable people, principles, that's the moral fanatic, conscience, the conscience man, his freedom, or his virtue. None of those people can stand. Only he who is ready to sacrifice all of this, when he is called to obedient and responsible action in faith and an exclusive allegiance to God. The responsible man, not the man who has reason, the principled man, not the man with a conscience, not the man who's free, not the man who's not the virtuous man, the responsible man who tries to make his whole life an answer to the question of call of God. Where are these responsible people? But look, who gets to decide what is done in Bonhoeffer's mind? God. Obedient and responsible action in faith to God. It's God who calls, who is called by God. All right, we're going to skip the civil courage section. He's basically just like, us Germans, we lack civil courage because we're just used to following orders. That's essentially what he says. Okay. So, of success. As you're talking about success, the success of getting down, of killing, let's just say killing Hitler, okay? for funsies. Although, now, because he's going to answer a criticism, although it is certainly not true that success justifies an evil deed and shady means. he literally comes out and says the end does not justify the means. If you have been following Bonhoeffer so far, which I know all of you have, you'll get that what you can misinterpret him into saying, well, the end justifies the means. Okay, but that he's very clear that's not what this means. It's not true. Certainly not true.
Mm.
That success justifies an evil deed and shady means. Okay, it is impossible to regard success, even though that's true. It's impossible to regard success as something that is ethically neutral. Okay? And then he goes on, he says, all this stuff in history, like you can't be ethically neutral. There's no this isn't science. There's not some pure test case where you go, okay, this thing is purely ethically neutral, which means, we have a dilemma because there is no, it's just ethically neutral. We don't know whether it's good or bad. It's ethically neutral. He says success is never ethically quite neutral. It doesn't mean that the end justifies the means, but at the same point in time, there isn't some kind of pure moral action that will lead to the success that you want. That's not how history works. So he'll say later on, he'll talk about success makes history, kind of like those who succeed kind of are the ones who get to decide what history was like. He says as long as goodness is successful, we can afford the luxury of regarding it as having no ethical significance. So he says, if we win, then we have the luxury of saying okay, this success has no ethical significance. In other words, the decision that we made was easy to make. There was no other decision to make, right? We killed Hitler. We stopped World War II. Well, of course we had to do that, right? It stopped Hitler. But you only have that luxury in hindsight. You only have that luxury when you're actually successful. When you're not successful, you don't have that luxury. It is when success is achieved by evil means that the problem arises. In the face of such a situation, succeeding by evil means, we find that it cannot be adequately dealt with either by theoretical, dogmatic, armchair criticism. All right? These are your Monday morning quarterbacks. We should have done it that way. That's theoretically wrong. That's morally wrong. It can't be dealt with by them because they refuse to face the facts, or by opportunism, which means giving up the struggle and surrendering to success. So he's saying this situation where you're doing something evil to achieve something good cannot be, and you're wrestling with this. It can't be dealt with adequately by the ivory tower academic, but it also can't be adequately dealt with by the person who just kind of finds an opportunity and just does it, right? So you have the pure action and the pure theory. Either one, he's saying they can't really deal with this issue, this tragedy that he's talking about. We will not and must not be either outraged critics or opportunists. Okay? They don't have the luxury of this. We must take our share of responsibility for the molding of history. Holy cow. He's deep into it. Okay? He understands he's in a historical situation. He's part of something, and they're dealing with a huge, huge ethical issue. But it's not a theory. It's real. Do I kill this person? Not if there's a train that comes over here and you've got the little lever and there's one person over here, there's two people over here. And if you pull the lever, it kills the two people. If you don't do anything, it kills the one person. What are you going to do? It's not theoretical. It's not the trolley problem. It's real. He's in Berlin. There's Hitler right over there. Do we kill him or not? One who will not allow any occurrence whatever to deprive him of his responsibility for the course of history because he knows it has been laid out on him by God, will thereafter achieve a more fruitful relation to the events of history than that of barren criticism and equally barren opportunism. He says, if you can be responsible, that's better than either one of those things. It's more fruitful. To talk of going down fighting like heroes in the face of certain defeat is not really heroic, okay? He says suicide missions are not heroic, but merely a refusal to face the future. The ultimate question for a responsible man is not how he is to extricate himself heroically from the affair, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to go down with the ship. I'm just going to run. I'm going to charge. I'm doing suicide mission. That's not the responsible man or woman, but how the coming generation is to live. Okay? So as a responsible person, you're going, okay, how are the future generations going to live? What we're going to do help them? And me just like going on a suicide mission, that does nothing for the future generation. I get out of it. I feel heroic, right? I tried my best. I was a hero. I died. But that on its own doesn't do anything. It doesn't solve the problem. It just kicks the can down the road. It's the next generation's problem. In short, it is much easier to see a thing through from the point of view of abstract principle than from that of concrete responsibility. This is his argument up to this point. In short, which he could have just said this, and would say this a lot of time, it is much easier to see a thing through from the point of view of abstract principle. It's way easier to go to think of something theoretically in principle and concept. It's much harder to have concrete responsibility. All right. All right, let us go. Let's see. Down 7. Let's skip. We can skip folly. There's a few things in it that's interesting. So, like the second sentence, it says, "Evil always carries the seeds of its own destruction, as it makes people at the least uncomfortable." That's kind of a famous phrase. He's basically talking about how like people aren't stupid because they are mentally stupid. They're stupid because of like mob mentality. So there's all these like intellectual Germans who are watching like their Jewish neighbors get taken away on trains, and you can't say, well, these people are stupid, but they're not. It's not because they're dumb. They're stupid because they're kind of collectively stupid. And he'll say things like, so folly is likely, or stupidity is likely to be not a congenital defect, but one that is acquired in certain circumstances where people make fools of themselves or allow others to make fools of them. It's something they're allowed to do. He says it's the fact, is a good point, the fact that the fool is often stubborn must not mislead us into thinking that he is independent. Just because they're stubborn doesn't mean they came up with it on their own or that they're making decisions, right? They might just be lying to themselves. He goes on and says, one feels, in fact, when talking to him, and you can tell that Bonhoeffer's been talking to people like this, and we got to stop Hitler. And it seems that when one is talking to him, that one is dealing not with a man himself, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like, which have taken hold of them. It's like having a conversation with somebody today, and they just repeat what they heard from Fox News or CNBC or whatever. They don't even know what the words mean. They're just repeating what's been told to them because they're sheep, because they're foolish. But they're not stupid. They're not stupid. They've just are lying to themselves. They're just they're letting. It says having thus become a passive instrument. They've become a passive instrument. They've let this evil overtake them, and they're just foolish. And he actually says it's more dangerous to deal with stupid people than evil people, because the stupid people or foolish people, they'll kill you to preserve the guise of what they're doing. Malicious people, you can stop malicious people. You can kill a malicious person. A stupid person, you can't, because these people are stupid in a crowd. But again, just because they're stubborn doesn't mean they're independent. Doesn't mean they're coming up with all this themselves. Okay, then he goes, this is contempt for humanity. Does this lead to a contempt for humanity? We've got to make sure that we don't allow that to happen when we're dealing with all of this stuff. It's not good. And he'll say things like, nothing that we despise in the other man is entirely absent from ourselves. There is no black and white, in the sense that even Bonhoeffer, faced with like Nazism, says nothing that we despise in the other man is entirely absent from ourselves. Right? It's not that we're morally perfect and they are. We're not. It's not a Western. We're not in the white hat and they're in the black hat. Okay, there's a lot of gray air here. There's a lot of gray here. We the things that we despise in them, we at least have a little bit of that in us too. And then he says we must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or don't do or are meant to do, and more in the light of what they suffer. We see people as, oh, they either do this or they don't do this, but we don't realize we have not taken into consideration what they've suffered. They've suffered. It's easy to judge the person who has watched his Jewish neighbor ride away in the train to the concentration camp. But what were they supposed to do? Are they supposed to hang on to them and not let them go and get shot? Maybe, but let's have some sympathy for these people, because it's not about what they do or don't do. We need to not just think in those terms. We need to think of what they've suffered. What have they suffered? I think this principle can be applied to today. We think of people in a very black and white dichotomy, but in a very binary way. But we don't really consider what they suffered. And he says the only profitable relationship to others is one of love. And he describes love as the will to hold fellowship with them. Can you break bread with that person? And then he says God himself did not despise humanity, but became man for man's sake. So if God didn't despise humanity, don't let yourself just become to the point where you despise humanity. We need to have some compassion, even on these evil people. Okay, we shouldn't have contempt for humanity. Imminent justice or imminent righteousness. I think we can probably skip. It gets a little theoretical. There is one. I guess we need to talk about it a little bit. In the second paragraph in imminent righteousness, he says, it is true that all historically important action that is historically important, like killing Hitler, it's constantly overstepping the limits set by these laws. So he talks about these laws. Okay, there are these kind of these laws of divine law from God. But he says, when the really important stuff, it's always kind of stepping and overstepping the limits of these laws. Okay? They're more like guidelines than actual rules. But this is, again, you can disagree with him. This is where... But it makes all the difference whether such overstepping of the appointed limits is regarded in principle as the superseding of them. So basically, we don't value these laws, we're replacing these laws, we supersede these laws, and is therefore given out to be a law of a special kind. We have our own special laws. Or whether the overstepping is deliberately regarded as a fault. It's wrong to do it, which is perhaps unavoidable. It's wrong, but it's unavoidable. It's justified only if the law and the limit are reestablished and respected as soon as possible. This is martial law. Okay, we have to suspend your rights in martial law. Some of our rights are suspended, which is only justified if, when the danger is past, those rights get immediately put back in. If not, this martial law becomes its own law, becomes the law of the land. The president or whoever, they can implement martial law. And they can say things like you have to be in your. They can give you a curfew, right? They can say every citizen has to be in their house by 8 p.m. Under normal circumstances, that violates our rights, right? But under martial law, there's some danger, when they were in England, they're going to have bombing raids. Martial law, everybody has to be in their homes, and you have to cover up all your windows and stuff, right? Well, that violates your laws, your freedom of movement, your freedom of expression, all these things. Well, we have to because Germans are trying to bomb us, right? Well, that's only works if, when the threat is over, those rights get reestablished. This is really dangerous. It's really dangerous when the government does it, okay? Extremely dangerous when the government does it. But it's even dangerous when Bonhoeffer is saying it, because he can say it all nice that he wants, but he's basically saying, it's fine if we murder Hitler as long as we don't murder anybody else as long as when he's dead. Like, we can murder Hitler, but we have to realize that, like, that doesn't mean we just start murdering everybody we want to murder. Like, those laws that we're overstepping that are wrong. This is kind of the crux of the thing. Most people, when they decide, hey, we need to kill Hitler, they're going to find a way to morally justify it as the right thing. Like, it's right. And Bonhoeffer is saying it may be the necessary thing, it may be the responsible thing, it may be the unavoidable thing, but that doesn't mean that it's right. It's still wrong. Bonhoeffer can't overcome that. It's wrong. It's overstepping the law, the limits that God has put on us. But it's unavoidable. And it's justified only if the law and the limit are reestablished and respected as soon as possible. Okay?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily hypocrisy. And he goes, well, isn't that hypocritical? And he goes, it's not necessarily hypocrisy if the declared aim of political action, like killing Hitler, is the restoration of the law and not mere self-preservation. So he's saying if we're killing Hitler to restore what the evil has undone, to restore the law, to restore everything, that is not necessarily hypocritical. It would be hypocritical if we're only doing it to try and preserve our own lives. Okay? So if we're killing Hitler because we don't want to die, that's hypocritical. But if we're killing Hitler because we want to reset everything, put everything back to order, he's not saying it's right. He's not saying, but it's not necessarily hypocritical.
I think a lot of times too we forget. We always think, well, Hitler, World War II, 41 to 45. And what people forget a lot of times is that they were living under this years.
And it progressively got worse.
Yeah, they were
Like
under Hitler for 10 years.
I mean,
like he's saying here. I mean, 33. That was even longer than that. I think. Well,
31,
yeah.
I think, but yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they've basically been under a martial law for a decade.
But you see it didn't. If Hitler had come out and done his worst things at the beginning and said, like, we're going to go kill Jews in these concentration camps, he would have been overthrown immediately.
Yeah.
But he did it slowly. It was just slowly. And he did all. I mean, it's not like that's the only evil things he did. He did all kinds of evil things, like when he took away journalism and there's only all this stuff that he did. But again, so you can see, you don't have to agree with Bonhoeffer, but Bonhoeffer is trying to deal with this, and he's saying the responsible action, it can still be wrong. So let's skip. We're going to skip a few articles on faith and the sovereignty of God in history. We're going to skip confidence. We're going to skip the sense of quality. We're going to get to sympathy. I'm going to try and finish this in our hour. Let me skip sympathy too. Okay, go to suffering. He goes, it is infinitely easier to suffer in obedience to a human command than in the freedom of one's own responsibility. Okay? If you're suffering because you're obeying orders, that's easier to deal with than because you are responsible for something and you're suffering because of it. It is infinitely easier to suffer with others than to suffer alone, even if nobody else agrees with you. It is infinitely easier to suffer publicly and honorably than apart and ignominiously. It is infinitely easier to suffer through staking one's life than to suffer spiritually. Christ suffered as a free man alone, and since then many Christians have suffered with him. We used to think that one of the inalienable rights of man was that he should be able to plan both his professional and his private life. Not anymore. That's a thing of the past. The force of circumstance has brought us into a situation where we have to give up being anxious about tomorrow. But it makes all the difference whether we accept this willingly and in faith, as the Sermon on the Mount intends. Here it comes. Back to the cost of discipleship. Or under continual constraint. Let's see. Yeah, then at the very beginning, like second to last sentence, thinking and acting for the sake of the coming generation, but being ready to go any day without fear or anxiety. That in practice is the spirit in which we are forced to live. So we have responsibility for the future generation. It's not easy to be brave and keep that spirit alive, but it is imperative. It is wiser to be pessimistic. It is a way of avoiding disappointment and ridicule, and so wise people condemn optimism. The essence of optimism is not its view of the present, but the fact that it is the inspiration of life and hope when others give in. It enables a man to hold his head high when everything seems to be going wrong. It gives him strength to sustain reverses, failures, and yet to claim the future for himself instead of abandoning it to his opponent. It is true that there is a silly, cowardly kind of optimism, which we condemn. But the optimism that is will for the future should never be despised. Even if it is proved wrong 100 times, it is health and vitality. And the sick man has no business to impugn it. We need hope. We have to be optimistic. There are people who regard it as frivolous, and some Christians think it impious for anyone to hope and prepare for a better earthly future. The world's just going to hell. It's all going to burn anyway. Those kind of people. But God said our prayer should be on earth as it is in heaven. They think the meaning of present events is chaos, disorder, catastrophe, and either in resignation, it's just going to happen, the world's ending, or in pious escapism, let's just escape it. They surrender all responsibility for reconstruction and for future generations. It may be that the day of judgment will be tomorrow, will dawn tomorrow. In that case, we shall gladly stop working for a better future, but not before. Bonhoeffer says, I will stop working to make the future better for future generations when Jesus comes back. Until then, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to back down to Hitler. And I'm not going to just escape and go be a pastor in America. I'm going to fight here. All right. We can do this. In recent years, we have become increasingly familiar with the thought of death. We surprise ourselves by the calmness with which we hear of the death of one of our contemporaries. We cannot hate it as we used to, for we have discovered some good in it, and we have almost come to terms with it. He's going to die a year and a half after writing this. Less than that. Fundamentally, we feel that we really belong to death already, and that every new day is a miracle. It would probably not be true to say that we welcome death, although we all know that weariness, which we ought to avoid like the plague. We're too inquisitive for that, or to put it more seriously, we should like to see something more of the meaning of our life's broken fragments. It's got to be worth this. This should be worth it. Something should be worth it. Nor do we try to romanticize death, for life is too great and too precarious. Still less do we suppose that danger is the meaning of life. We are not desperate enough for that. We know too much about the good things that life has to offer. Although, on the other hand, we are only too familiar with life's anxieties and with all the other destructive effects of prolonged personal insecurity. We still love life, but I do not think that death can take us by surprise now. After what we have been through during the war, we hardly dare admit that we should like death to come to us, not accidentally and suddenly through some trivial cause, but in the fullness of life and with everything at stake. We want to go out gloriously. It is we ourselves and not outward circumstances who make death what it can be. A death freely and voluntarily accepted, like when he walked to the hangman's noose on April 9th, 1944. We have been silent witnesses of evil deeds. We have been drenched by many storms. We have learned the arts of equivocation and pretense. Experience has made us suspicious of others and kept us from being truthful and open. Intolerable conflicts have worn us down and even made us cynical. Are we still of any use? We've been silent witnesses of evil deeds. We've watched these things happen and we've been silent. What we need is not geniuses or cynics or misanthropes or clever tacticians, but plain, honest, straightforward men. We need just regular people, regular dudes. Not geniuses, not cynics, not misanthropes, people who hate humanity, not clever tacticians, just straightforward, plain, honest men. Will our inward power of resistance be strong enough and our honesty with ourselves remorseless enough for us to find our way back to simplicity and straightforwardness? There remains an experience of incomparable value. We have, for once, learned to see the great events of world history from below, from the perspective of the outcast, the suspects, the maltreated, the powerless, the oppressed, the reviled. In short, from the perspective of those who suffer. They're not seeing world history from a place of dominance, but from those who are suffering. The important thing is that neither bitterness, that this is happening to them, nor envy, that they're not in power, should have gnawed at the heart during this time, that we should have come to look with new eyes at matters great and small, sorrow and joy, strength and weakness, that our perception of generosity, humanity, justice, and mercy should have become clearer, freer, less corruptible. We have to learn that personal suffering is a more effective key, a more rewarding principle for exploring the world in thought and action than personal good fortune. We've learned more about the world from suffering than we do by good things happening to us. This perspective from below must not become the partisan possession of those who are eternally dissatisfied. Okay? Rather, we must do justice to life in all its dimensions from a higher satisfaction, whose foundation is beyond any talk of from below or from above. This is the way in which we may affirm it. So, this perspective is not the possession of those who are always suffering, who are always dissatisfied, eternally dissatisfied as a non-believer. Rather, we, the Christian, can do justice to it, and our foundation is not because we're from below suffering or from above dominating. It's because we see things clearly from God's perspective. This is the way in which we may affirm it. So you're sitting there at your kitchen table. It's let's say it's New Year's Eve, and a letter from good old Dietrich shows up, and it's 3 million pages, and you're reading it, and then you get to this part, and he's talking to you about you, and this I'm going to read again. I'm going to read it in the. Actually, I think I have an easier translation. I may be able to read. Where's 119? Yeah. Nah, I like this one better. This is just better. So I want you to close your eyes. Imagine you're Dietrich's friend, and you've just been, you're surviving. You've tried to help with the resistance, and you've tried to do the little bit you can, but you're also trying to survive the war and not get killed or the Gestapo do anything to you or the SS or whatever. And then you get a letter from Bonhoeffer, and at the end he says this: "We, including you, have been silent witnesses of evil deeds. We have been drenched by many storms. We have learned the arts of equivocation and pretense. Experience has made us suspicious of others and kept us from being truthful and open. Intolerable conflicts have worn us down and even made us cynical. Are we still of any use?" That's his question in his after 10 years. Are we still of any use? Are we going to be responsible and do the right thing, or the wrong thing for the right reason? I missed a section, I think, that I highlighted here. I want to make sure. It's right before on success. Let me just hit this real fast. I know we're almost out of time. I'm sorry I missed it before. Where is success? Okay, right before on the very ending of civil courage. It says civil courage, in fact, can grow only out of the free responsibility of free men. Only now are the Germans beginning to discover the meaning of free responsibility. It depends on a God who demands responsible action in a bold venture of faith. and who promises forgiveness and consolation to the man who becomes a sinner in that venture. This is kind of that last paragraph already was kind of the peak of his talking to them and trying to get them to wake up. But this ending of civil courage is really the highlight of his of him talking about their action. He basically is saying is God could demand you to take responsible action in faith, and if you become a sinner, if you sin in that venture, he promises forgiveness and consolation. And this is how he has reconciled it in his mind. He is going to now his kind of role in the assassination attempt of Hitler is kind of overblown. He was part of the conspiracy, but not really a central part. Relatives of his were, but anyway, he definitely was part of the resistance. And the way that he dealt with this, Bonhoeffer, the person who loved humanity, who was at his heart kind of a pacifist, the way he reconciled it was to say, God has demanded us to be responsible. This is how he looked at it. God has demanded us to be responsible. We have to be responsible men, straightforward, honest men and women. We're responsible for the future of Germany for our children. We're responsible for the future of the world. We have to take action in faith. God demands that we have to be responsible for the world that we live in. We have to take action. And if we sin, if we do something sinful in that bold venture of faith, then God promises forgiveness and consolation to us. So he's saying if killing Hitler is a sin, God's going to have to just forgive me. God promises to forgive me and console me. It's better in Bonhoeffer's eyes. Not better. It's inescapable. It's unavoidable. If you're a Christian and you get put in this situation, which none of us have been, hopefully none of us will be, he doesn't ever get to the point where he goes like, oh, it's not a sin. It's not a sin. It's okay. No. It could still be a sin. But if it is a sin, then God's going to forgive you. And he'll console you. He'll reconcile you to him. Because at the end of the day, it's really nice to sit back here and go to ethically parse things. Well, that's a sin or that's not a sin. I mean, to use one of these examples, and this is ethical theory, but you're hiding Jews. Gestapo agent comes to your house, says, are you hiding any Jews? You say, no, we're not. They go on down the road. Well, you lied. Lying is a sin. There's no part of the Bible that says it's not a sin if you lie for a good reason. There's no verse in the Bible that says it's okay to lie if you have a good reason. Lying is wrong. Jesus says it. The father of lies is Satan. Lying is wrong. It's a sin. But, I mean, you're put in the tragedy of having to decide between two sins. You either lie and sin by lying, or you give the Jews to the Gestapo. What are we going to do? Well, all of us are going to lie. And what most of us would say, and many Christians would say, would be like, in that situation, it's okay to lie. It's morally justifiable to lie. It's not actually a sin, is what we would say. Bonhoeffer is going to say, no, it's still a sin, but it was unavoidable. Like, you didn't have a choice. Either way is a sin. But God can forgive you of the sin of lying. It's going to be okay. Like, you can do that. Like, it's still a sin, but you have to be responsible. You have to do the right thing. And sometimes, and again, this is Bonhoeffer's conclusion in 1943 with Hitler, sometimes you have to sin in order to be responsible. It's very rarely, and it's only when faced with competing kind of this ethical challenge. But Bonhoeffer is telling these people, you can't sit on the fence anymore. Either way, anything you do in this point is potentially a sin. Okay? It could be a sin to try and kill Hitler. A sin for which he died.
That was the bomb in the satchel that they tried to get.
The Valkyrie, Operation Valkyrie.
Yeah, where they tried to put the satchel near him and it didn't work out.
Didn't work out. Yeah. And so we're next week, and I'll hand these out. Next week we're going to read two letters. One of them, they're both to his friend Eberhard Bethke, who was his best friend and who compiled letters and papers from prison. One of them's from April 30th, 1944. The next one is for the day after the failed assassination attempt of Hitler, July 21st, 1944. So take one and pass it down. Again, you don't have to agree with Bonhoeffer. You can say, no, I think in that situation, it's not wrong. It's morally justifiable. It's not a sin. But you have to at least appreciate how much he thought and wrestled with what he had to do. And he settled with the fact that it's all fine to be a professor somewhere and theoretically think about like ethics. It's really different when you're faced with the decision of what to do. I don't know if Howard's red hand is that he has a question or he's just or he's the high five or he's admitting to murdering. All right, thoughts?
On this title page, a reckoning made at New York, 1943. Was this a presentation that was done?
No, it was a letter.
What does that mean?
He wrote a letter to his friends
In New York?
No.
There's a,
New Year. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
you were thinking New York, yeah.
I was
No.
saying New York.
Yeah.
There's a note that he has in there that I had to find. As the given to Hans and Eberhard.
Yeah.
at
Abraham
Christmas of
Bethke.
42. One copy was kept under the roof beams of Bonhoeffer's parents' house. So,
And what?
in Schottlandberg.
It's at the end of the note.
Yeah.
It's probably the one they got. I mean, when Eberhard Bethke got his letters and papers, he assembled them from all over the place. People would get letters from Bonhoeffer and they would try to hide them, because they'd be taken if they could be found.
Wonder how they tie. Well, it's more of a historical thing, but I'm curious now how they tied it back to him since he wasn't. I mean, he was involved, but he wasn't like purposely involved.
Yeah, we can. I mean, you can read more about
I'll
it.
have to go look for that. Yeah.
His I think it was his brother-in-law that was very involved.
It's interesting.
But I mean, his going to he went to England. I mean, he worked for the resistance all the time. Remember, at this
Yeah.
time, what's really funny is he worked for the civilian kind of branch of the spy network, essentially.
Yeah.
But they still, I mean, that was kind of a safe haven for these people.
Fletchley. It is interesting to see. It'd be interesting to. Did he? Do you know if he wrote anything? Say 5 years into this. Instead, we get the 10
We
year.
read Life Together. That was,
Right. That was that 5 years in.
I don't know. I mean, everything we've read has been.
Sure.
Everything that we've read has been chronological. So the only thing that we've read pre-Nazi is Cost of Discipleship,
Oh, okay.
which even then I have to see.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, and there's a bunch of letters.
Sure.
Let's see. All of them have been after. Cost of Discipleship was 37. Life Together was 39. Ethics was finally published in 49, but he wrote it all throughout.
Right.
And then after 10 years, and these letters obviously are in 43 and 44. He didn't get it. Yeah. So,
Just the process he had to go through to get to this point is interesting.
yeah, he went from I'm a pacifist to let's off this Hitler dude. I will say this in closing. I know we've gone over. People will try. So there are ultra right-wing fascist people who take some of the works of Bonhoeffer, ironically, I guess, and kind of fashion it into some kind of like fascist, like we have to stand up and, blah, 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 and we got to fight the tyranny. The fact that any writing of Bonhoeffer's could be used for any kind of fascist ideal would be abhorrent to him, who's literally fighting fascism.
Right. The exact opposite.
On the other hand, we have to remember, too, that Bonhoeffer is faced with an extreme. Okay. Now we can take principles from that because you yourself may be forced in some place to have to decide between a real moral ethical dilemma. And what Bonhoeffer is telling you is that, yeah, you have to pick the best of evil sometimes, but like, and you might even sin through that. But if you do, like, God will forgive you, but the better you have to take action. Tom's like,
I don't know what's doing.
Dad, you want to help Tom?
I don't know
He's
what's
calling
doing.
911.
901,
Yeah.
yes.
But you have to take you have to take action. Like you have to do the responsible thing. And the responsible thing is like what's best for your children, the future generation, not like what's going to be easiest for you or how do you get yourself out of the situation. You know, Bonhoeffer saying you've when you're in that dilemma, you have to face it head on. You have to be a man. You have to pray. I mean, you would do all those things, but yeah, you do you make the decision. You do the thing. Be bold. You kill Hitler when faced with a decision. And the point I'm making is many of us are not placed in a situation where we have to decide whether to kill Hitler or not. So let's not pretend that our whether we're going to pay the traffic ticket or not is Bonhoeffer's dilemma. And unfortunately, there have been people who have kind of taken some of Bonhoeffer's writings and used them for kind of fascist ends. And it's the most famous Bonhoeffer biography is written by a guy named Eric Metaxas. Now, I'm not saying Eric Metaxas is a fascist, although he probably is. But don't read him. Don't. People who devote their lives to Bonhoeffer and go to Bonhoeffer conferences and who love Bonhoeffer, they all equally hate Eric Metaxas, who kind of stole Bonhoeffer, wrote a really popular book about him, and like Bonhoeffer's relatives have decried him. I mean, just if you go to Half Price and you see a big book about Bonhoeffer and it's written by Eric Metaxas, anything that's written by Eric Metaxas, just you can listen to me or not listen to me. Stay away from it. Okay, Bonhoeffer would not like it. All right, anything else? Go forth and follow Christ. We have one more meeting next week. We'll read these last letters, and then we're going to have to leave Bonhoeffer. Thank you, everybody. I'm not.